Good morning, Cliff. How are you?
Good morning, Ruth. I'm very fit and well, and welcome to a slightly cloudy and overcast Embley. But I'm
Was
sure the sun is bound to break through at any minute because it's the gorgeous south of England. So why would the sun not break through?
Exactly. Well, I hope it does. Thank you so much for joining me. We met in Hong Kong. When was it? A few months back.
Yeah,
You said you were just
February.
saying before February, and it's now May. It's almost May, so we're just at the tail end of April. And so, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. When I spoke to you, we met at one of those. I call it a little bit like speed dating. Sometimes there's all of those schools in one room, and we had a brief conversation. But you know what? It really stuck with me, and I think on the spot you agreed to come on the podcast. And I thought I've got to get you on, so I'm looking forward to our chat. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Now, one of the things that hampered my research slightly, and I remember that you said when we met, you're not on social media. You don't even have a LinkedIn account. So, what is there any particular reason or?
With this, it's not about me. It's Embley has a social media presence. Embley has an account,
Mm.
and I've never been it's never been. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should. I think I remember saying to you that my colleagues are giving me a hard time because I'm not on LinkedIn. I don't know that I've lost out anything, but then I wouldn't know that I'd lost out anything.
Yeah.
But the
That,
thing is, I think that it's the school is the most important thing, and the
mm,
children, the community at Embley. I'm very very happy to support that. I'm probably better
right.
off supporting that, in the background, just saying, actually, this is what we do. This is what Embley's about.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to find out more about the school, but if you don't mind, can I find out a little bit more about you as a person? Because I do believe, like you just said for the moment that you're sat in the engine room. That's your office, is it?
Yes,
Um, but you're the driver, so I do believe that whatever happens in the school flows down from the top. So, as the head of the school, can we find out a little bit more about you? Is that okay?
of course. Yeah. What would you like to know?
Well, I can detect a lilt. It's an Irish lilt, if I'm not mistaken. So tell me about your own education briefly. What was that like?
Okay, so I grew up in the southeast of Ireland. I was educated by Augustinian monks in a local school. It happened to be a boarding school as well at the time. Um, I'm very, very proud of the education that I had. It was a very, very all-rounded Enkuklios Paideia. We did three languages. We did all of the sciences and maths and so forth. There was a very strong emphasis on sports and getting out and getting active. Um, yeah, I remember sitting. I was one of those students who sat and wondered and pondered, and I was saying to the children here at assembly, just asking them, inviting them to reflect on the kind of poor individual teacher who had to educate a guy like me, who was always asking questions. I was always quite a curious little chap, and I think ultimately then when I became a teacher, I wanted to be the kind of teacher I wanted to have. They were open to questions. They were quite keen to prod us on. The leaving certificate that I took back in the day seems like a million years ago now, but it was hugely expansive. There was no sense that you narrowed your focus as you went through school. The whole idea was that you broadened your horizon. So I went to university from there. I came to the United Kingdom in the early 1990s. I had my career here. I've made England my home. My family have all grown up here. Um, so I'm very, very proud of the background I came from. There was a strong Gaelic games tradition, a very strong rugby tradition where I came from. Um, and I suppose that leaves an imprint, doesn't it, on the kind of individual. But there was a certain, I think the monks also kind of bred that sense of, humility and thinking of a project that was bigger than you and committing yourself to something that was worthwhile. And that sits very comfortably in my wheelhouse. It's the way I go about my business, and it's the way Embley goes about its business. The students here are engaged in making the world a better place.
That comes through very, very strongly in everything. I've read all of your blogs. They're very, very good, and I'd encourage anyone to
Oh,
go and
crikey!
read. No, they really. I mean, I'm not a big reader. I have to admit, I've kind of got out the habit and I lost the knack a little bit. But I did enjoy reading them. Yeah, humility comes through very, very loud and clear. Just to go back for a moment. So, did you go straight into teaching? And I believe you've been a teacher for your whole career, straight from uni, right?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I had a dalliance with a number of ideas about what I might do, and but yeah, teaching. Again, is what I say to the children here. In some respects, the career will find you. If you are open to explore the things that you're passionate about, if you are kind of engaged and you're purposeful, and you just kind of try to live the life that is yours rather than somebody else's, or what social media suggests might be a good life. If you are authentic to yourself, then the career will find you, rather than looking along the shelves of careers and think, oh, that looks like it's a nice job, or some such. I always took the view, Ruth, that the object of life was to be happy. And that sounds awfully twee, doesn't it? And, oh well, yeah, everybody says that, but it's curious, that money makes misery comfortable. It doesn't make you happy. Other things make you happy, and I think sometimes the world needs to pivot a little bit to think, actually, well, what actually are we about? And I think post
Mm,
COVID and post crash and all the rest of it, we're seeing a lot of folk thinking, well, actually, what are we for? What is our purpose? What is it about? And if we are going to live authentic, happy lives, usually it's in the service of something that isn't about fulfilling my need. It isn't introverted navel gazing. Never been a big fan of that. And I do think that happiness is to be found without. But thank you
no,
very
I
much for reading the blogs. That makes you and my mum.
no, that's not true.
No, that
Um,
isn't.
yeah, no, being happy, but you so you've been. I mean, you've been fortunate that obviously teaching has made you happy and still makes you happy. Not everyone has that luxury. Mm.
Oh, no, you see, the thing there is I wonder. I'm not entirely sure. Um, is it? I don't. If we're in a world where happiness is a luxury, I think we're in trouble. And I think we actually then need to look at our choices and need to look at, well, what goal did you set for yourself? And if it was
Mm.
an artificial goal, if it was a goal that didn't sit within what made you authentic, then you can't be happy. But I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know where luck comes into it. There are certainly moments in my career where there were challenges. There are certainly moments in headship where there are very significant challenges. So happiness isn't a constant state of jollity. Happiness
No,
is something more profound, where you can cope
yes,
with those kinds of things.
yeah. No, I like. I mean, some of the words that you're using. I also use in conversations that I have with parents. Authenticity and knowing who you are, and as parents, knowing who our children are, as individuals. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I sometimes refer to it as a more of a sense of contentment, right? It's not, happiness
Yeah,
and
no,
all of that. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's a more sublime state than the kind of fix that you get from seeing something that you enjoy, or doing something that you enjoy. That's momentary and it passes. But what I'm talking about is exactly as you mentioned. It is a
Mm.
state of being rather than
Mhm.
a kind of a momentary, ephemeral sensation.
We get very philosophical very quickly. You mentioned obviously you boarded with monks. I mean, are you a man of faith, and how does that like feed into what you do? I don't know. Is Embley attached to any particular order, or
It's,
is it?
no, it isn't. But
Oh,
it has a Church of England Christian foundation.
okay.
I'm a practicing Catholic. Um, I think you cannot divorce your faith from your life. That seems to be a curious thing. Faith isn't just what you do on a Sunday. I think faith is what you do every day, and particularly, I suspect, faith is the kind of thing that you do when nobody's looking. And it's how you actually dispose yourself to be in the world and what you're about. So yeah, it absolutely informs what I do. Its essence is inclusive. Its guiding principle is based on love. We talk about love quite a bit at Embley,
Mm.
not necessarily in a romantic sense, but a disposition that actually wills the best for somebody else. That notion that we are all brothers and sisters. There is, and again, and that really sits behind the whole boarding experience here, because I was really quite keen, Ruth, to have children in Hampshire understand that actually children are children, regardless of race, creed, color, disposition, orientation, or location. That in essence, we are all human beings. And as such, we
Mm.
share that common kind of brotherhood or sisterhood, however you want you phrase it. So,
Mm.
so that is a certainly mixture of faith and kind of personal understanding.
Yeah, I mean, why do you mention in Hampshire? Because it's a rather sort of homogenous.
Well, yeah, when I came to Hampshire, it was a very sort of homogenous Anglo-Saxon,
Mm.
monocultural part of the world. And the world we inhabit isn't that. So
Mm.
what we've experienced here is the embracing of international students into the family of Embley, such
Mm.
that they overnight with day students' parents. They stay sometimes for holidays. The integration is authentic because it's a
Mm.
genuine coming together of young people. Um,
Mm.
and it's one of those things, Ruth, isn't it, where families are all alike, really. Parents can be fussy, and folk think that they're funny, and they tell the same kind of jokes. And what's lost in translation is just the humor.
Let's take a quick break to talk about something that can make all the difference for your child's educational journey. I'm thrilled to share that this episode is sponsored by Top Schools, your trusted partner in navigating the complex world of school applications. If you're aiming for a top independent school in the UK, Top Schools offers personalised consulting to ensure your child finds the very best fit with a guaranteed outcome. From identifying those best fit schools to crafting standout applications to invigilating the entrance exams, the expert team is with you every step of the way. Ready to take control of your child's future? Visit topscoresadmissions.com or click the link in the show notes to learn more and book a consultation today. Use the code DESTINATION for 20% off. That code is DESTINATION for 20% off personalised support for entry into a top independent boarding school in the UK. Now, back to our conversation.
Yeah, no, you talk a lot about, well, so back to the boarding for a
Sure.
moment. I
Yeah.
know that Embley, I think if I'm not wrong, it's around 70 students board out of a total of about 750. So it's a rather small boarding contingent. But, we do have, we have a lot of listeners who are international. So considering they would typically look for a larger boarding community within a school. I mean, what would you say are the pros and cons of both?
Um, I think the number is a little bit of a misdirection because you could find yourself in a very large boarding house with 200 or 300 children. And my
Mhm.
question is, what's the so what of that? Does that mean that there are going to be more like minded or less like minded people than you? It fundamentally depends on why you want to come to that school. Is that school the right fit for you? Because it's about the engagement with the individuals rather than the concentration on the numbers. Now, behind the numbers usually sits some notion of, well, what happens at the weekends? Are they going to be isolated in their rooms and so forth? And the answer here is absolutely not. There's a lot of activity that goes on. There's a lot of integration between the day and the international borders. And the point of that is to actually experience what it's like to be in the UK.
Mm.
So if you have a mindset to really engage in the experience, it doesn't matter if there's 10 or 1,000. If you have a
Mm.
mindset that says, I don't want to involve, would want to get engaged, again, it doesn't matter how many you have. It's about what is your purpose? What is your reason for coming? Um,
Mm.
but, I hear it quite a bit, oh, we're not sure about coming to you because, such and such has 200 or 300 borders. And I'm thinking, and? What's
Mm.
what's the upside of that? They're going to get lost in a large crowd of international kids, or are they actually going to be known and loved for who they are? I don't know. I've never really worked that one out. But you're going to ask me a question, I think, that challenges
No,
me.
I'm interested to explore this further because I think it does relate to your, your focus on sort of belonging and community. So I think the reason, from the parents' point of view, I think that the reason is it's probably some simple maths involved. If you are going to a co-ed school and there are 70 boarders, then probably 35 of them are your gender, and of the 35, maybe they're not your kind of people. But I suppose that's maybe some sort of fundamental thinking of some of the parents that I've spoken to. Um,
Yeah, fair enough. But does that mean then that when we look at the motor racing club, that we have some kind of stereotypical notion that the girls who come to us are not going to be interested or involved? And I would challenge that really hard. Or does it suggest that if we have X number of boarders, and our borders, like our school, is about 50-50 in terms of the gender balance. Um, but there are some, I think, preconceived notions of what interests there are. Now, let's look at that. If my interest is in music making and so forth, does it matter if I'm making music with boys or girls? And I'm not sure that it does. And I think the point is, the challenge, I guess, is where do I find like-mindedness? You find yourself in a university setting, and that question dissolves. You don't even think about it because you would expect in the History Society for there to be boys and girls. You'd expect in the theoretical physics club there to be boys and girls. Even in driving, I think in any sphere of interest, you'd expect there to be mixed groups. So why should schools be any different? And if we're genuinely inclusive, and if we are going to be talking about a common humanity, then nothing that we do here is exclusive to a particular gender. No more than it would be exclusive to a particular culture or context or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a few girls' schools recently. I haven't spoken to any boys' schools recently. Um, but one of the things that they say, for example, is that, girls, without boys in the classroom, girls can really excel in their STEM subjects and they don't have to worry about boys. And therefore, all of the STEM clubs are, of course, only girls because there are only girls in the school. But then, I don't know, what would you say to that?
I think that's really worrying. I think it's really worrying because it suggests some kind of predatory or inhibiting
Well,
presence
yes, I think that's exactly it. I
of
think they
boys.
are saying that girls are inhibited by the boys in the classroom, or maybe inhibited
Yeah,
by
no,
by the
and
boys.
I take that observation. Much of my career was actually spent in single-sex girls' education. Um,
Okay.
But I would challenge that, and I would say that certainly, I think there's even a greater sense of girls realizing their potentiality, being their best in a context where it is mixed. That kind
Hmm.
of secluded ivory tower of homogeneity can lead to I think, an insecurity that hits them later on. And all you're doing
Hmm.
is you're storing up that for something further down the line. Does
Hmm.
your confidence grow because you grow in a greenhouse? Or does your robustness grow because you're actually just outside the greenhouse? You're getting all the support and care that you need, but you're also open to the elements. If the winds of change never rock the plant, it doesn't sink deep roots. So you have to have some kind of wind of change rocking the plant so that it can establish those firm roots. Now, if you, I mean, even look at family dynamics. I
Mhm.
can't imagine there are too many families where you have timid girls who are kind of retreating from their brothers. I suspect it might actually work the other way. You have rather robust young men who are being told off by their sisters and being put in line. Now, again, I don't want to play into stereotypes, but just think about it, Ruth. As a school, our business must be not to grow rarefied plants in silos, but to grow authentic human beings. And again, everything about Embley speaks to that very core purpose that we are about authenticity of purpose, a focus on making the world a better place. And we don't do that by secluding ourselves in an ivory tower.
Hmm. Yeah, no, no, it's interesting. I went to an all-girls school myself. I didn't put my daughter in an all-girls school. I don't know. I think your point about, we want them to establish firm roots. Of course we do. We all want them to, in the face of those wins or whatever. But will they? um,
You see, much of that then will depend on how the school deals with it.
yes. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and this is where the quality of school rather than the context. I think if you have an authentic school that is genuinely catering for individuals, it will address that absolutely because it cannot
Okay.
not address it.
Hmm. All right. So I'm going to go off piste a little bit because this is interesting. If that's all right with you.
Oh, whatever.
You
The time is yours.
you mentioned that you are an inclusive community. So if you have a child, I'm not saying I say boy or a girl, who a little bit fragile, shy, maybe English is their second language, and you welcome them in. What do how would you nurture that child? What are some of the things and some of the ways in which you would foster their confidence to create a sense of belonging?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that you're talking about there. I remember a lovely experience once, very early in my career, and a Japanese student I was teaching was upset, and she came to speak to me about her report card. And she said that she was upset that the teacher invited her to contribute more in lessons. And this was the teacher saying she should talk more in lessons. And I'll never forget, the child was bereft because she said, I pay attention, I concentrate, I listen, I think about what the teacher's saying, and other students disrupt the teacher by asking questions that are irrelevant and deflecting their attention because they enjoy the stories the teacher tells. And it really awakened the eyes of my mind to realize that that actually, what do we mean by participation? And that shy student who's not necessarily contributing overtly is contributing in lots of other ways. To come back to the practicality of your point, they all have a buddy, they all have a tutor. We monitor their engagement in lessons, but we also monitor their engagement in co-curricular work. Where they are shy and timid, we tap them on the shoulder and suggest they buddy up and they just try something. All of the time, we are taking a challenge to their door and inviting them to join with us. Now, you take a challenge to a child's door and say, I think, Ruth, that you should get more involved in drama. Well, timid Ruth is going to think, well, I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to back away. You come to Ruth and say, Ruth, I wonder if you'd give me a hand with something. I need to do some work over here. Now Ruth is helping me out and getting involved in something. Covertly, maybe a little bit through subterfuge, but you end up getting involved in something, and all of a sudden you are now finding yourself with a group of people which you didn't have common purpose with, but now you found common purpose. And it takes off from there. So we do it by stealth. And I don't think that's a bad thing. C.S. Lewis once wrote that a great deal of knowledge and truth is smuggled into children's minds under the guise of romance. And by romance, he meant stories. And that's exactly what we do. Because if I sat down with a shy, timid Ruth and I said, Ruth, I really think we need you to get more involved. Yeah? I'm now presenting you with an obstacle that you found difficult at the start. And now I've made it worse because I've now put pressure on you to do something about overcoming it. Sorry, we've been interrupted by the chimes.
It's all right. It's the school bells. Yeah,
No,
I was never. Yeah.
They're the bells on the clock on the wall behind me. We don't have
Oh,
bells
that's
at school.
on the hour. Okay, no, that's the quarter hour.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All right. No worries.
But you take what I mean
Yeah.
about that shy, timid student, because it's actually about effectively befriending them. Yeah.
Yes.
So I always used to say this to the kids that I taught. Yeah. It's about getting into the trenches with the kids. It's about talking about what we will do, not what Ruth should do. And suddenly they find a sense of belonging. They're part of that already. Sorry, Ruth, I'm talking over you.
No, I was just going to say, well, firstly, I was never shy and timid, so we don't have that problem. But I know you're using me as a. But it strikes me then to, as the skill of a teacher. I mean, a lot of what they're doing is psychology, isn't it? It's to understand what makes children tick, and that's probably almost as important or even more important as actually delivering content on the syllabus.
100%.
Yay.
The art of teaching is absolutely about building relationship, understanding the child in front of you. Which is why, if you just want to acquire knowledge, go on YouTube and watch the videos and you'll get that. But if you want to, because Embley is about the formation of children. Education is only part of that. And I make absolutely no apology for that. And I will tell parents quite openly, if the only thing you want are a group of grades at A level or GCSE, whatever it is, then you can do an online course and you'll save yourself a fortune and you'll get the job done. It's utterly transactional. But what you won't have is a child or a young person at the end who has a sense of authenticity, a sense of competency, a sense of themselves, and a capacity to go into the world and actually engage. And
Mm.
all of those who leave us in the sixth form, you can drop them into any context, and boom, they just go with it. They know how to get on. Not because they know necessarily the answer to all the questions a customer or a client might ask, but they have the capacity to think on their feet, to react to what they're involved with because they've got deep roots formed because they were challenged to bend with the wind. I'm
Yeah.
mixing metaphors all over the place here.
No, they're great. You don't have any direct experience of state schools, I think, as a teacher or as a leader.
Correct. So I've not
Um,
experienced that.
but do you receive children from state schools, or do you have any view on how how education is at the moment in not as it's a huge generalization, obviously, but um,
No, we have. I've got the greatest respect for colleagues who work in the state sector because the class sizes they deal with are significantly larger than ours. The needs they deal with are significantly diverse, and I think the demands on them are profound. I've got
mm,
nothing but the highest regard for colleagues in the state sector. The
mm,
children who come to us from the state sector, they do find the interpersonal stuff here. They find it a little bit strange at the start because teachers will expect to have a conversation with them. They will expect to interact with them. They will expect to
mhm.
talk to them in the corridors, and they talk to them at
As
lunchtime.
was your Japanese student that you were mentioning earlier, potentially, just
Yeah, exactly that.
culturally, it's not what they're used to.
The
Mm,
engagement, exactly that person to person engagement. But also, I think the richness of the co-curriculum, the fact that we actually look at learning as a process, that we're absolutely focused on outcomes. Our children do really, really well in exams. They do excel, but they don't excel because we teach narrowly to a test. They don't excel because we're not going to do this because it's not on the curriculum.
mm,
We've taken some further maths lessons on quantum theory, non-Euclidean geometry down to the prep school, and we're
right.
teaching year 10 and 11 kids about geometry on a curve. Why? Just because it's an interesting thing to do, because it's difficult, and it's the celebration of that for its own sake, the celebration of inquiry for its own sake. Um,
Mm,
I think my colleagues in the maintained sector may not have the luxury of being able to do that quite as much as we do, where
yeah,
they're more bound to a fixed curriculum.
yeah. I think yeah, that's what I hear as well. No direct experience, not since I was at school. I went to a state school for primary. That was a very long time ago, and then I went to a girls, very tiny girls' school that unfortunately is recently closed down, but not not very recently. I think it was like 2 years ago. Um, we could talk, I mean, I want to understand a little bit more about the formation of children. And obviously, you've been teaching for 25 years. And I know that what you said, I think that ostensibly your viewpoint is that children are children and parents are parents and families are families, and there's some core values there that won't change, or not. Maybe, I mean, have they changed? Because obviously we hear a lot of talk about being future ready. So our children, I mean, I have children. I do have children.
Yes, three
Yeah,
girls.
yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, they they're different. My children are different to how we were, and a lot some of that relates back to what you were saying earlier about being happy or being content in life. I do feel like like I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, that we were pressured in some sense to fit into the societal norms of 2.4 children, 9 to 5 job. That's kind of what you were expected to do. I do see that that's changed. Um, do you?
Yes, it has. We're seeing parents coming to us who don't want academic hothousing. They don't
Hmm.
want that enormity of stress and pressure put on their children because they've seen their children. They've seen maybe themselves. They've experienced that sense of they were pressured because of a parental expectation or a societal expectation, and some of them really unhappily find themselves in extraordinary positions of influence and power and so forth, and deeply unhappy because it isn't what they wanted. They're living somebody else's dream or somebody else's ambition. And we've seen a significant sea change in that. We've seen parents who absolutely want their children to be the best academically they can be, but they want them to be authentically themselves. They want them to be happy, and they don't want to
Mm.
compromise. They don't want to sacrifice one for the other. Um,
Mm.
and I remember when I was head of sixth, I used to do a lot of work with parents, kind of talking them down from where their daughters, um, talking them from where they wanted their daughter's ambition to be. Um, and we had a situation, I've told the story many times. We had a situation here where a group of parents two parents came to see me after a careers event we had, and they were upset because their child went into the meeting thinking she was going to be a doctor, came away wanting to read journalism. And I said, I maybe told you the story, Ruth. I said, the bottom line here is that they paid for the ticket, she chooses the train. It's her life, it's her destination, it's her purpose, and it must always be that. To go back to the formation piece, so in terms of being future ready, that makes me laugh a little bit, because I think, how can you be future ready if you don't know what's coming? How can you be ready for what's coming? Um,
Yeah.
so I take a slightly different. I think by now you might realize it's maybe a little bit more idiosyncratic. So if you think about being future ready as trying to map what that future is going to be, well, forget about it. So we don't create cartographers. We don't create people who make maps. We create navigators. So regardless of the map and regardless of the terrain, if you have a compass and a sense of purpose and direction, it doesn't matter what the terrain is. And it doesn't matter that so the map is not the territory. So if the map is inaccurate, it doesn't matter. If the territory is difficult, it doesn't matter. Why? Because you have a compass. You have a sense of purpose and a direction. You have an orientation. And that's the thing that matters. So if you say, right, I'm going to hold on to my compass, formed and shaped at Embley, but only because I'm in the middle of it, then it doesn't matter whether your job will change or technology changes. That's the landscape. It doesn't matter, because you are oriented by something that is bigger than the landscape and bigger than the map. So in doing that, it's about being the best version of yourself, being authentic, being open to taking a risk, being open to all the difficulties that come with being human. What does that actually mean? How do we solve problems? And being authentically human is not taking an easy path. It's about doing difficult things, because I think ultimately that's what our mind was created to do. We are problem solvers by just, at the core of our DNA. That's as a species, that's what we do. We solve problems, we sort things out. And I think if you go back to that, it's really simple. It's really basic stuff. Clearly not so basic as a whole industry about doing something else. But I think that's really basic. So we create a generation of cartographers who navigate the landscape in front of them and make their own maps.
Yeah, I've read your thing about having a compass rather than a map, and it was something I was going to ask you about. It sounds it sounds so obvious and so sensible.
Mm.
Yet I wonder if, within the confines of a school where we think of it traditionally as an institution that, delivers teaching, where children are learning, there's a prescribed curriculum and a syllabus that's set out. I mean, how does everything that you've just talked about, how do you fit that in the context of a school, a traditional school that needs to deliver content?
Because it's the oxygen that we breathe. It isn't the stepping stones that we walk across. So if you think about the knowledge and curriculum we deliver as the stepping stones, well, the oxygen is the interaction with the questioning, with the presentation of difficulty, with making children purposefully uncomfortable and asking them to do things that actually make them a little bit off kilter. That then makes them think about, how do I establish my own balance? It's about
Mm,
all of those challenges that are sometimes soft and sometimes hard, that
mm.
knock them off kilter and make them come back.
So that
Go
is
on.
the terrain that you were referring to earlier, in a
So
sense.
yeah, so the curriculum, if you think about it, you're right. I mean, every school as an institution, yeah, does a very, very similar thing. And if you looked at our curriculum and the curriculum of 1,000 other schools, there's not a huge deal of difference. There are subtleties. At Embley, we teach philosophy across the piece because we want them to engage in difficult. So there's a whole line of inquiry there that gets them thinking about things that are really quite difficult and challenging and so forth. We accept the fact that not all opinions are valid or correct, and it's not. It's not one of those. It used to drive me nuts. So you say, "Oh, yeah, it's all about a matter of opinion." No, it absolutely isn't. Philosophical thinking is absolutely not about just it's a matter of opinion. We can all agree. That's froth on beer, yeah, and it just blows away in the wind. It has to be reasonable. It has to be backed up by data. There has to be some kind of evidential base. If none of those things apply and the data doesn't support it, you're wrong, and then you need to go away and think again. And I've always remember Richard Feynman in one of his lectures talking about this kind of thing. And I think, that's it. That guy's got it. So it's really proper scientific thinking that doesn't flatter egos and doesn't flatter ambition. It just bends the knee at data and the application of reason. So we engage children in all of that. We get them talking to each other about all of that in a perfectly reasonable, disagreeing agreeably.
Mm.
The world is missing a great deal of that. There's a lot of invective and people just shouting, and no one's hearing anybody. And that's the other bit of it, listening attentively to what people are not saying.
How do you do that?
You read between the lines and you think, so you present an idea to me and I think, well, okay, that sets up part of your thinking. And I say, well, where does that come from? What sits behind that? And that goes back to the interaction with children. The most important thing when you're speaking to children is to listen for what they're not saying, because what they're not saying is the real meat of the deal. And children who come and say, well, they're upset with this or they're upset with that, think, okay, well, tell me about that. And I think, I think what I hear you saying is that you feel lonely or you feel sad. Yes. So it isn't actually what they said that was the problem. What the problem was actually, something that sat underneath that you desperately wanted to be friends with somebody and found that obscured by whatever they said.
Well, what's your take on, you know, I don't want to use the word well-being in schools, but I can't think, or mental health in schools, and the the number of children who are identifying as, having anxiety or ADHD or something like that, and whether or not it's the right thing to validate those feelings. And I don't know. I mean, that could be a whole different conversation for
Well,
another time.
yeah,
But I'm interested to hear your views on that, if we can
that's
briefly.
well. Actually, I did assembly yesterday on exactly that. Um,
I didn't know that, so perfect timing.
I I have a concern
So
about
do I.
the preponderance of that. Now, just think about what So the feeling is the feeling. So I want to see, children who present as anxious. That's the way they are. That's the way they're experiencing the world. We need to look at what sits behind that. What's causing it? Ultimately, I think a lot of anxiety is caused through living inauthentically. You know, I want to have these kinds of friends, or I want to be part of these kinds of groups, or I look on the wretched social media that you suggested I join, and I think where everybody is having a wonderful time, and I likened it to Plato's cave, where everyone is sitting looking at their phone as the shadow on the back of the wall of the cave, thinking somehow that this is the world, and it profoundly isn't. Now, I think I think genuinely the big companies have a great deal to do to be responsible for that, because I think they've gone out to create a generation of kids who are addicted to looking at that wretched device. So I think that is as an issue with it. I think allowing children to understand that failure is okay and getting things wrong is okay, not repeatedly, because we need to learn from those kinds of mistakes. We need to learn to speak to each other and listen authentically. So there is a concern. There is, I think, certainly amongst young people, people recording that rising levels of anxiety. But I go back to what the cause is. What are you anxious about? What's causing that? Why is that fearfulness there? So a very simple approach is, do what you can, use what you have, start where you are, and don't worry about 2 weeks, 2 years, whatever. Don't worry about the road in front. Worry about my next step. What's my next step?
Mm.
And let's deal with that.
Yeah, it's a difficult.
It's a very, very, very complex issue, Ruth. And I'm not
Mm,
suggesting that, the utterances I've given you are an answer, an antidote to that. It's significantly more problematic and more layered
of
than
course.
this conversation can allow. But yeah, there are
Mm.
multiple causes for it.
But you're seeing an increase in this, are you, in your school?
Yeah, I think we're not immune from the tide of change that wraps around the world.
Yeah.
I think one of the real antidotes to it, though, is to get out, to be active, to get into nature, run up and down mountains, get involved with mountaineering. We sail like people with their hair on fire. Um, there's a real antidote to that culture to be found in occupying yourself, mind, body, spirit, in something that just literally, I'm in a boat, I'm sailing, the wind's changing, the tide's moving. I've got to focus on this. That
Mm,
then exhausts my entire, right. How can I be anxious in that moment? I might be thinking about what's going to happen next. Or equally when you're out on the moors and so forth and you're doing that kind of work, trudging along, looking after your comrades, looking after, the team, having that sense of belonging, that dilutes that sense of isolation that anxiety brings. And that's a
mm,
real cause of concern for me.
no, 100% agree. I mean, I think the wretched device, as you put it, has a lot to answer for, and the companies that make them and push them, peddle them, dare I say. Are we starting to see a little bit of a reversal? I think schools are clamping down on phone usage, and maybe, hopefully, kids that are born in the last couple of years might not have so much exposure, overexposure, as kids in the last sort of decade or so.
Yeah, I think we have a policy here of not having phones in school. The children don't need them, so why would you have it at all? We do use technology in lessons, but we use it for learning. It has a very specific purpose. Um, I've here's something I liken this, that if I don't have notifications switched on my phone.
Hmm.
Um, So let me give you this example. If we're in the same room and I whistle at you to get your attention, you might reasonably say, "How dare you? That's outrageous. Do you mind?" But if my phone goes, that's okay. And I think, no, that isn't okay.
Okay.
So nothing can command my attention. I choose what gets my attention. And it's taking back that level of control. And I think what our children are up against, Ruth, is a sea of tech that is insistent on getting their attention, and subtly, sophisticatedly, and sugar coated does everything to do that. So there will have to. That tide is inexorably at the feet of the phone manufacturers and the software developers. It is in their interest to continue that tide to rise. We're trying to get kids to deal with how you actually, float the boat, how you continue to navigate your course in that rising tide. So
Mm,
let's not worry about changing the tide. That's going to be what it is. Yeah, what we can do is, like I said about the kids who are anxious, control the things that are within your control, and the rest of it, there's nothing you can do about that. Now, I think we
mm,
are seeing more and more people becoming authentic will effectively influence the other bit of work. So we don't allow children to have their phones. We have a fairly robust system if they're found with their phone and they do lose it. Um,
mm,
and that's cool. But parents are on board with us with that.
mm,
They think that's a good thing. And so do we. For the most part, the children here are far too busy throwing a ball around, running around in the woods, getting out and about, and we actually see very little use. We do also have a screening system. Is we're a bit more remote here, so they're on our Wi-Fi, and we can see what stuff they access. So we did a little bit of a canvas, and we found a group of children accessing the same content over break time. And so, lots of people, oh my goodness me, this is terrible. The content they were accessing were computer programming tutorials.
right.
I still didn't care for it because I don't want them to be on a screen. But to be fair, Ruth, it was pretty wholesome, honest, knowledge-based stuff. They're learning how to do stuff, and they're interested
Mm,
in that. So it wasn't nefarious. It wasn't helpful. I thought they should be out doing something, getting some fresh air, but they
mm.
weren't up to mischief.
Yeah, phones in schools. One thing I look for, and I would love to come by and visit, maybe next month or the month after. I'll check with you after. Um, just look for that on campus. I just look for, the older students, maybe fifth form, fourth form, fifth form up. If they've got their phones in their hands, they're walking through the campus. I just feel, disappointed somehow.
Yeah, our
So
guys
need.
are they're not allowed to have their phones out. It can't even be visible.
So
Uh,
what they put it in it's in their bag or it's in a locker like all
right.
day while they're
Yeah.
in school.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We are running out of time super fast.
Oh,
I could talk
crikey.
to you all day. Let me move into some closing thoughts. I mean, what's your general view on the state of the independent sector at the moment with the challenges? Have you seen enrollments as, healthy for the next year, for example, next 2 years? Any thoughts?
Yes, I think government policy in the UK is significantly impacted on independent education, and negatively so. That said, parents still value hugely what independent
Mm,
schools do. And we've seen parents make deeper and further sacrifices to make sure they can still afford what we do. We have at Embley, and I think lots of other independent schools have taken significant steps to moderate their costs, to absorb some of that cost. That's meant rationalizing processes and so forth at schools. Um,
mm,
and yeah, I think we have a community of parents at Embley who are committed to the things that we do, and that's held fast. We haven't seen
mm,
very much, quite modest change, but curiously, we've actually seen an increase in the numbers who are coming to us from the state sector. So,
oh,
whereas the tide might be moving in one direction because it's becoming, it's price sensitive. We've seen parents who haven't previously bought into independent education saying, actually, no, we love what you're doing and we value it so much that, yeah, we're going to send our children. And it's counterintuitive
interesting.
in some respects because some of it is around the sixth form,
Mm,
and there's ample, non-fee paying sixth form provision, but they're electing not to do that. So that says something about what we do.
mm,
So I don't know where that's going to go, Ruth. Hopefully it will level out. I do know that independent education has been through a number of crises in my career. It seems to be robust. It has, I think the better schools are, on the balls of their toes or all balls of their feet, able to move with the time and just flex and so forth. Um,
mm,
but ultimately, there's a core value of independent education about putting children at the center of things, about the formation of them as human beings that
mm.
doesn't disappear, and parents are committed to it in the same way that we are.
I hope you're right. Um,
So do I.
I my children are out of it now. My son's graduating this year, so but no, I think it's just been amazing. I'm a massive fan of boarding, um, and the independent what children can enjoy and experience in an independent school such as Embley. Is just there's just nothing like it, and it's such a short amount of time. They're children for such a short amount of time, that I'm super envious of the experience that they and all children that go to boarding schools have.
And there's two things I would add to that. Um, the boarding experience is absolutely pivotal in the formation of the children because it allows them to hold on to childhood appropriately without being in a rush to grow up or get old. I've never I've never really seen the virtue of that. But it also allows them to take personal responsibility and ownership, to be the best version of themselves. So that, yeah, they do have responsibilities for laundry. They do have responsibilities for
Right.
keeping their space shipshape and tidy.
Mm,
But they're doing that in community. They're doing that where
mm,
everybody's doing that. and there is a shared expectation. And you see them grow. You see them. So, if anything, they are more ready than any to actually launch out into the world.
Definitely.
Yeah, do you know what? There's another C.S. Lewis quote that I remember, and it's around that idea of, he talks about when he became a man, he gave up childish things, and amongst those childish things, he said one was the desire to be very grown up, and the second was the fear of being thought to be a child. And I thought the second one is really interesting. The fear of being thought to be a child. So that sense of pretense that comes
Mm,
with I've got to be an adult, I've got to perform a role. Whereas
mm,
a child is content to be questioning and open and all that goes with being, there's an innocence to being a child that I think is beautiful,
mm,
genuinely
being,
beautiful.
yeah, as adults, we can be childlike when appropriate.
Yeah. Being childish is not so helpful because that's the
No.
tantrum and the screaming abdab and so forth. Yeah, but childlike is, yeah. There's a beauty and authenticity in our humanity in being childlike.
Yeah. I know that you're super well read. Not C.S. Lewis, but if there was a couple of what books or what literature or fiction or non-fiction do you recommend some of the parents in your community would read so they understand you a little bit more? Heaven
Oh
of
God.
work.
Um, yeah, that kind of question always makes me quite uncomfortable. I find myself being skewered and saying, "Well, um, maybe the easiest jumping off point is to address the blog because
Yeah.
I started writing that when I arrived here, and initially I wrote a little essay at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Friday every week, um, and I was intent on it. It wasn't a piece that summed up what went on in the school. It wasn't a piece that talked about the fixtures of the
Mm,
weekend, but it was something that said, this is the kind of stuff the guy who leads the school is thinking about. And it's an
yeah.
insight into the weirdness that goes on in his mind at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Friday. So that's a good place to start. The
Yeah.
second thing, maybe in terms of literature and so forth, that's massive. And I wouldn't know even where to begin. Um, Gosh, that really does skewer me. I'm a big fan of Albert Camus. L'étranger is a wonderful piece of work. Contradistinction to that, Shusaku Endo, Japanese author, Silence, recently made into a film. I think Russian literature is fantastic. Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground or Crime and Punishment, they can be a little bit dark, but then Turgenev has some amazing short stories, and Tolstoy's Anna Karenina is a remarkable bit of work. Um, Isabel Allende, House of Spirits, brings in a South American dimension. And to be balanced, there's a real beauty in anybody who's interested in understanding a little bit about North America would do no better than reading. Well, you could read Bryson, but go back to Steinbeck and Travels with Charlie. Travels with Charlie is an extraordinary bit of work. And then in an Irish context, Dubliners by Joyce is a phenomenal bit of work. But I suppose I have a real fondness for Sam Beckett. Um, you know, um, yeah, you could almost pick up anything, you know. So whether it's the novels or some of the plays, that's a wide canvas.
Long list. That's a
Sorry,
reasonably long list. And we'll have to go through the transcription to put them all in the show notes, but that's great. Thank you.
I didn't
Yeah.
even cover the classics because I talked about Plato and
Well,
what
it
I
goes
was
without
doing
saying, it goes
there.
without saying. Do- Can you speak French, Cliff?
No, I had a modest amount of French when I left school, and I was quite keen to hold on to that, and I did for a long time, because I did it up until the sixth form. Um,
Nice.
but long use. I remember when I was like I gave the example earlier of some of the students I taught, but I did with some of my Japanese children. I learned basic conversational Japanese because what I wanted to do with them was to give them the understanding that if I was making mistakes in learning language, it was okay to make mistakes because I'm modeling mistake making, and they were so inhibited by getting it wrong.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I found that richly entertaining, and then a little Polish as well. But uh, if you don't use it, you lose it, Ruth. So that's gone by the way.
You do. What were the three languages you learned in school? Was it English, Latin, and
Oh,
okay,
Irish, English, and French.
oh,
So
so you did learn French in school, yeah, Irish,
yeah,
English. I what was I going to say? Japanese. Are you seeing a little bit more interest from Japan at the moment?
yeah. There seems to be something going on there.
Mm.
It's on the rise a
Yeah,
little bit, and I don't really understand why. For a long time, they had economic difficulties, um, but yeah, it does seem to be on the rise.
yeah,
That's
we're seeing the same.
that's a remarkable culture and country.
Oh, I love it, love it. It's yeah, love it. And at this time of year, beautiful.
Cherry
Um,
blossom and so on.
we need to leave it there. I need to let you get back to running your school. Thank you so much. It's been fascinating. Um, I'd love to visit. I'll message you later on about that. I'll be back in the UK at the end of the month. But thank you so much,
Not
Cliff.
at all.
You've been a great guest.
No, it's been my very, very great pleasure, and you're welcome anytime. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. It was lovely to be in
Yeah,
your
of
company.
course.
Take care.
Thank you.
Stay
Take
safe.
care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.